Sunday evening. My name is Michaela Meltz. I am president of the Sisterhood, and we are here tonight continuing our theme of Judaism and art, and I'm very excited tonight. We've got a great evening planned. We have Davir Kahana from the Amen Institute, and he's going to be introducing Rebbitzin, Aliza, Sperling, I hope I got that wrong, right? And Richard McBee. And Davir is the founder of the Amen Institute, and it's where artists and rabbis come together to inspire the creation of sermons and artwork. So it's a wonderful organization. Davir is a rabbinical student. He also received an MA in Jewish Studies from here in McGill. He's founded the Moish House in Montreal and currently sits on the Regional Advisory Board as a resident at the Moish House in Harlem. And he received Jewish Week's 36 under 36 recognition for launching the Amen Institute. So well done, Davir. And I'm going to pass it over to Davir. If anyone has any questions, please put them in the Q&A and we will get to them at the end of the session. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Davir, and take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor to be here and to present this week's presentation of the Articulation series. We have with us today Rabbanit Aliza Sperling and Richard McBee. Rabbanit Aliza Sperling teaches Talmud at Maharat Yeshivat Chovevei Torah's Beit Midrash program. She's also the director of Her Torah, an innovative women's Torah study that brings the world, brings women across the Jewish world together to learn from and with one another. Aliza received smicha from Yeshivat Maharat and a JD from NYU Law School. Wow. Richard McBee is an art critic and painter of Torah content with a prolific body of work spanning more than 300 paintings and 200 articles. Richard is heavily immersed in the Jewish art world. He was program director of Alliance of Figure Artists in the 1980s, and in 1991 was one of the founding members of the American Guild of Judaic Arts. And in 2008, he co-founded the Jewish Art Salon. Without further ado, Rabbanit Aliza, please set the framework for this conversation.
Thank you so much, Davir. Thank you so much, Michaela. I want to first, on behalf of myself and Richard, I really want to thank Shaar Hashomayim. I want to thank Robin and Michaela and Susan for everything that you've done. I want to thank Davir and the Amen Institute for this amazing project that you've put together. My family has heard many times over the dinner table how excited I am about all my conversations with Richard, and it's really enhanced my life in amazing ways. So thank you. And of course to Richard, you've been an amazing chavruta study partner, and I hope that we can continue to learn together. When Davir set us up, I thought that you were the artist and I was the rabbi, and then you presented me with a dissertation basically on the chapter that we were going to learn together. So it's been a pleasure to learn with you. I want to set the stage for all of us so that we can really appreciate what the painting that Richard is going to present. Richard and I studied this upcoming week's Parsha in Parshat Vayeshev, and we looked at two stories of women who go a little farther than you might expect in order to get what they want. The first story is the story of Judah and Tamar. So Judah, after he and the rest of the brothers sell Joseph, he goes away from the rest of the brothers, and he marries one son off to a Canaanite woman named Tamar. This son dies, and so he then marries Tamar to his second son. The second son also dies, and so Tamar is waiting to get married to the third son, and Judah, understandably perhaps, is a little afraid of having her marry his third son. He's afraid that he's going to die as well. And so Judah just doesn't do anything. You know, the ways that sometimes when we're confronted by big questions, we just freeze. Judah doesn't do anything. And so Tamar is waiting to get married again. And the way that it worked then is that she couldn't get married to anybody else if she doesn't get married to Judah's third son. And so she takes matters into her own hands. She dresses up as a prostitute. Judah doesn't know that it's Tamar. He finds her on the way. They get together, and then he finds out later that Tamar is pregnant. He doesn't realize that he was the one who impregnated her. And so the story goes on, lots of drama. In the end, Tamar has the baby, and it is the forebearer of the Messiah. That's story number one. Story number two is one that's probably more familiar to you. That is the story of what happens when Joseph is sold down to Egypt, and he works in Potiphar's house, and Mrs. Potiphar decides that she needs to have him. And so every day she's coming to him and she's saying, sleep with me, be with me. And he doesn't listen until one fateful day when nobody is at home. It looks like he's about to succumb. And then at the very last minute, he doesn't. And because, as a consequence of his not agreeing to be with her, he is sent to jail. So these stories, on the one hand, are similar stories. Two women who try to use their sexuality to get what they need. On the other hand, the ways that they've traditionally been told, Tamar is the righteous woman and Mrs. Potiphar is the villain. And Richard and I had a lot of very intense conversations about whether Mrs. Potiphar should be seen as the villain. I'll leave you with a question that we might get back to later, which is, would it change your view of Mrs. Potiphar if you heard that a midrash says that she received a prophecy that she would have a child with Joseph? Would that change how you think about her? And Richard's painting is going to address this. Now, Richard and I talked about these two incidents, but then we went even farther afield. We talked about the role of women in the Tanakh, in the Bible. We talked about what it means when women use their sexuality in order to move things forward in a way that they wouldn't be able to do with any other tools that they have at their disposal. And I hope we get to a lot of these really rich pieces together in our conversation, Richard. Somehow, Richard took all of this Torah, all of these midrashim, all of these arguments, all of these conjectures about what it means to be a woman in Tanakh, and produced a beautiful painting that he's going to share with us tonight. So it's really been my pleasure to work with you, Richard.
Thank you very much. So let's see here. Good evening, everyone, and Shaar Hashomayim Synagogue, thank you so much for hosting us, and the Amen Institute in Devere. It's really not an exaggeration to say that I've been waiting for this probably somewhere around 22 years. So this is really, I've been working with these subjects, at least that time, one of the subjects actually even longer, about 25 years. And I've really wanted to see them together as paintings, but did them separately. And this gave me the occasion to try to tackle the whole thing as narratives that relate to one another. So again, I thank you so much, really from the bottom of my heart, for allowing us to start this. And needless to say, Aliza, you have been the best Havrusa I think I have ever had. And frankly, I have never worked closely with anyone with the painting and with the Torah knowledge that you have. So it's like, this has been very, very special for me. So let's see. With this enormous amount of material and with intense learning with Aliza, I started making and have made so far a 60 by 48 inch painting. The painting was done. It is not done. It is in process. And it was started sometime by the end of October, which is when we really got this project going. And I worked on it up until about 15 minutes ago. Let's see here. Well, let's go forward and see. There's a foundation to this painting. And the foundation is this image. This is from the Golden Haggadah It is a panel from the Golden Haggadah of Miriam's song, Miriam and the women singing after they have safely crossed through the sea. And it's a very, very famous image, and it's a favorite image of mine. It is also important in the Golden Haggadah, which is, if I remember correctly, it's 13 something or other. It's one of the great masterpieces of medieval Jewish illumination. But among other things, some scholars actually think that it was probably made for a woman. These figures of these women singing, they're playing tambourines, of course, and the woman in the center is holding the music for the women to sing to. Because these figures are the largest figures in the entire Haggadah, it is thought that very likely that, in fact, the Haggadah was made for a woman. And also there are other things. Mark Epstein has written a fantastic book about this. Anyway, a very important illumination, and one that ends up being the inspiration for the center image of my painting. This is my painting of it's hard to know exactly what to call it. Somehow today I got to it calling it as the Song of Eve. And then Aliza said, well, maybe it's okay, but how about something like the merit of righteous women? We're still, as the painting is in progress, we're still working on a title. That's because this painting has been an evolution of images. Again, the central image, and you see as one that echoes the, going to the next one here, that echoes the Golden Haggadah, the women are singing. This is the women, this is Miriam at the sea. They're singing the song of the sea, but what's behind them? What's behind them is their past, and actually all of our past. It is Adam and Eve. It is Adam and Eve in the garden. It is Adam and Eve under a fig tree, because fig is one of the fruits that are thought to be the, quote, forbidden fruit. But it is exactly at the moment of, well, let's put it this way. It's right after the moment of Eve's great transgression. She touched the tree that she was commanded not to touch. And she is now giving a fig to her husband, to Adam, sharing this transgression with him. This central image, one of celebration, of women strong, celebrating a victory. Actually, of course, remember, right at the edge of coming out of Egypt, about to go to Har Sinai, right? Women right there, right, combined with a woman, our original woman, in the initial transgression, that takes us from children or whatever we were to full human beings, self-consciousness, i.e. of eating the forbidden fruit, which is the fruit of becoming self-conscious. So where do we start? In the painting is divided. The left-hand side of the painting is Mrs. Potiphar. The right-hand side of the painting is Tamar. So on the top of the left-hand side of the painting, there is Mrs. Potiphar. Mrs. Potiphar is having a dream. She's having a vision. And if you notice at the bottom of that panel, she says, I dreamed Joseph and I had a family. That's not my idea. That's a midrash, but a very crucial midrash, which helps us unpack Mrs. Potiphar's motives. The next image, actually going across the top of the painting, is Mrs. Potiphar so in love with Joseph. He's a handsome boy. We all know that Joseph makes up his face. He's quite a piece of work, this guy, really. Aside from his relationship with his brothers, also, again, midrashically, this is a man who really likes to take care of himself and thinks a great deal of himself. And here she is leering at him. The next image is where he is now about to do something about this. He, in fact, has decided that he will, when the house is empty, sleep with Mrs. Potiphar. Now, of course, our Torah tells us that she cornered him and he really didn't want to. But if you look into the Midrashim, they are almost universally agreed that this man did everything he could, in fact, to sleep with Mrs. Potiphar. And in fact, again, this is not me, the Midrash says that he was naked in bed with her, practically on top of her. And one of the only things that stopped him was an image in the window. There's one Midrash that says the image in the window was the image of his father. Okay, that makes sense. But then Aliza opened up the Midrash for me and she told me, no, there is another Midrash, one that says he saw the image of his mother. Wow, that changes everything. It means that this Mrs. Potiphar is this woman who's trying to have Joseph, and his own mother, Joseph's own mother, is, as it were, pushing back. So you have two women in the narrative and are pushing this narrative forward in a way that you would never expect. The next scene along the Mrs. Potiphar side is, of course, well, now he refuses to sleep with her, and she says, you know, as you see the text at the very bottom here, not so fast. She grabs him, and of course, it was reflected in the biblical verse that talks about how she grabbed his cloak, and therefore that was the evidence that she presented. Just an aside, I've been working on these paintings and these kinds of images for many years. These that you're seeing in front of you are just the last month. They're based upon something, and what they're based upon is the notion that the women in the Torah, the narratives that have women in Torah, they are the engines of the Torah. They move the Torah narratives forward, and very frequently do so through their sexuality or through their desires. But unlike a standard view of the narrative, Torah narratives that are male-dominated, if you start to look at the women as the engines, you suddenly see women as being very strong and very certain that they have a very important role to play, and in every case, they do. Moving along. Now, this is going to take a little explanation, okay? Here the text says, "This is my adopted daughter, Asnat." Now, if you will remember, Pharaoh gives a woman named Asnat to Joseph, right? Once he's out of prison and he becomes basically the prime minister of all of Egypt, and then he's saving Egypt from the famine, right? He gives him a wife. Where did that woman come from? Ever think about it? Ever think about how is it that Joseph, the Jew, ends up getting married to Asnat? What is she? An Egyptian? She was, and in fact, I believe the text actually says she was from the house of Mr. and Mrs. Potiphar. Oh my goodness. What are we to do? Well, the rabbis know what to do. There's another midrash, and a midrash that says that after Dinah was raped, of course, there was a child. And that child, well, the brothers thought that child was evidence of the disgrace of their sister. And therefore, Yaakov took that child and sent that child down to Egypt, and she was adopted by Mr. and Mrs. Potiphar. Not me, our holy midrash. And hence, Joseph, who is on the left, kneeling, Asnat, who's protecting him and actually presenting him to his new in-laws, ends up being introduced to Mr. Potiphar and Mrs. Potiphar. Can you imagine how surprised Joseph was? Moving right along. So, if you will remember, at the end of, towards the end of Genesis, yes, Bereshit, right? There's a cross blessing, right? Joseph brings his two children, Ephraim and Manasseh, to his father, Yaakov, to be blessed. Except, what does he do? He actually decides he's not going to do the normal thing. He's going to cross his hands, and he's not going to bless with his right hand the older one. He blesses the younger one, messing up things. Well, there's a very famous painting by Rembrandt of this. And that's what this painting is based upon, because while it shows Yaakov in bed, very, very old, and the children on either side of him, and Joseph standing alongside of him. Joseph has a turban, is very typical of Rembrandt. Lo and behold, there's a woman standing in the middle. Who is that woman? There is no woman in the text with that cross blessing, but that woman is Asnat. That woman is the child of Dinah, and that woman is also been adopted by the woman you see on the right, Mrs. Potiphar. And so the text says up here, listen to my grandfather, Yaakov. a total new rereading of this episode in the Torah of the cross blessing. And again, the dominant role of these two women to make sure things went right. Asnat understands that Yaakov, her grandfather, is right to change the blessing. Moving right along. Now we're going to change subject slightly, okay? Because I wanted to get the painting so that we would end up with Miriam and the women singing. So how do we get there? Well, we get there obviously through Moshe Rabbeinu, right? Well, he has to get found. Well, you probably know that Moshe Rabbeinu was found by an Egyptian princess, right? Daughter of Pharaoh, they say. Okay. Do you know what her name is? Her name is Basya. What's Basya? Well, Bas is daughter, and Ya, if pronounce it here, but you could say a Ka, meaning the daughter of God. This Egyptian woman has such a powerful role that she saves Moses. She jumps in, she has her handmaids jump in to save Moses, which essentially moves the narrative again forward. But that's not all, because if you notice on the top of this panel, it says save the baby. Okay, but it's over these two little figures here. Who are those? Well, that's Miriam and Yocheved, because they are the ones also watching Moses to make sure he gets saved. So again, women are central in moving the narrative forward. So now, back up to the other side. The other side is Tamar, the side of Tamar. And this is the first instance where Tamar, quote, enters the narrative. It's when the first two husbands she was married to end up dying. Now, they don't just end up dying. They don't get hit by a car. The Midrash says, and in fact, the Torah, it says, because they, quote, displeased God, it's because they sexually abused her. I won't go into the details, getting late, but the point is she was an abused woman. And hence, as an abused woman, she felt that she had to resort to desperate measures because she had an idea that she had a role to play in this family. And indeed she did. And hence, the next image across the top is she's sitting on the side of the road posing as a harlot. And here comes who? Here comes, as the text underneath this says, the patriarch Judah stopped for casual sex. That's our parsha. I was looking at the commentaries. I was looking at the Mikras Gedolos today. Today? No, yes, no, maybe even today, yes. Do you realize that no one raises an eyebrow, not one of the major commentators that you'll find says, what's a patriarch doing having casual sex on the side of a road with a stranger? Whoa. So I've done a lot of paintings of this, but anyway, here's the incident that now, of course, will drive the narrative forward, because unless Tamar gets pregnant by part of this family, well, we know there'll be no future, actually, a future in which we have David HaMelech. The next panel is almost rather ordinary. It's when they discover that she's pregnant and she says, I was pregnant. The next panel is, of course, when she's accused of harlotry, which, by the way, interestingly enough, she's guilty of, except for a purpose, and except with the patriarch himself. Of course, she says, this staff is yours. Hence, she's spared. Hence, she is allowed to give birth to twins. Just as an aside, again, another midrash, actually the commentary, I think it's Lee Barbanel, the Ibn Ezra. Ibn Ezra mentions that, the commentators say that Yehuda never slept with Tamar again. And one commentator, again, I think it's the Ibn Ezra, says the reason he didn't sleep with her again, he was afraid that if he did, maybe he would die too. Okay, twins. What can I tell you? I just had to carry the narrative forward. And the twins, well, there they are in a double stroller. And, these things are rather personal for me, of course. I mean, I've been dealing with this material for a very long time, but also, thank God, my daughter had one daughter. And so I've been strolling my 7-month-old daughter around Carroll Gardens in New York. And so I'm kind of familiar with strollers, etc. So I just thought it would be a nice addition to the painting. Well, okay, so we're kind of done with Tamar, right? Because she has fulfilled her purpose of actually now, moving forward the narrative and moving forward the Davidic line, enormously important. But while we're thinking about the Davidic line, let's look at another woman. How about Michal? She is really interesting. As you all know, David, when he brings in, when he finally gets the Ark of the Covenant out of the hands of, I've forgotten now, it's probably the Philistines, he dances it into Yerushalayim. And you think everything should be fine. I've always loved the image of David dancing, except his wife at the time doesn't think so. She thinks it's unseemly of a king to dance in such wild abandon. So in a way, she gets a bit of a bad rap, but I wanted to show something very special about her. If you look closely, she's wearing tefillin. And there's a Gemara that says, in fact, she's one of the few women in Tanakh who actually wore tefillin, and the Gemara says, and the sages did not forbid it. They allowed it. So this is obviously a very special woman. She has the temerity, but perhaps also the courage to criticize David in his abandon. Again, a woman very important for us to notice. And then finally, since what we're talking about David, finally, Bathsheba. Bathsheba. So we all know the story. David is prancing, is pacing around in his palace. He's up on the roof, up on the balcony, and he looks and he sees a beautiful woman. He's so taken with her. He says, "Who is that woman?" Right? And he's told who she is. She's Bathsheba. And so he sends a note. He demands that she comes to him, and then he has sex with her. And of course she gets pregnant. And in fact, he then conspires to make sure that Uriah the Hittite is no more. Well, as I'm painting this, I'm realizing something. Do you really think for one moment that a woman who lives in proximity of the palace and knows the king's habits is going to be displaying herself casually for no purpose? I maintain that actually Bathsheba made sure he would see her partially clothed, to lure him in to this. Because again, this is a woman with an enormously important role to play in our narratives. She not only marries him, she not only is the queen, but on top of it, she's the mother of Shlomo. Wow. So there's no midrash that says this. There's no midrash that says she had an inkling that she would move the narrative forward. But all I know is if people are in close proximity, you do your bathing secluded. You're not out there. If you're out there, you're probably got your eye on the person who you think is probably going to watch you, and it's got to be for a purpose. That's my additional understanding of this. So, the bottom of the painting. The bottom of the painting, again, remember we've gone down both sides, okay? And now we have a kind of a foundation of the painting, and then you've got the middle panel. The middle panel are the Jewish women, Miriam, singing at the Song of the Sea, and behind them is Adam and Eve, essentially moving humanity forward with eating the forbidden fruit. How do we get there? We get there because in Mitzrayim, slavery was awful. But there's a fantastic midrash, and there's actually a pasuk in Shir HaShirim that refers to how we survived slavery. How did we have children? Well, you know, what the women did was they took mirrors and they went out into the fields and they went out under the apple trees and they went with their husbands and they beautified themselves in the mirror and they kind of taunted their husbands. Look at how pretty I am. I know you've worked so hard and we're slaves, but, and therefore they aroused their husbands and they had children. Jewish women did what they had to do to keep the Jewish people alive. In this scene of the women beautifying themselves and arousing their husbands under the apple trees, it's a pasuk in Shaar, which of course then leads to the central panel again, Miriam and the children of Israel, the women of Israel singing the song of the sea, and referring back, if you'll notice on the left-hand side of this central panel, there's a figure, it's hard to see over here, but she's actually pointing back to Adam and Eve, to, more importantly, not Adam and Eve, but to Eve. Because Eve's transgression is what is the engine that makes us human beings, self-consciousness. And I'm not telling you tonight to transgress prohibitions, but the women of our Torah did, and they drove the narrative forward, and they got us to where we are now. And that's quite something. And so anyway, I think I'm probably well through my time. I apologize for going on, but
Richard, I think I speak for all of us to say that's amazing. What you did is really amazing. I also want to acknowledge that we've been working through these texts for a while, and I want to acknowledge that these are very painful texts, texts that have to do with fertility, texts that have to do with sexual abuse, rape. And I want to acknowledge the people who are listening to this and facing their own challenges or calling up memories right now. And it's hard because the Tanakh is really full of stories like this, and for people who have their own personal experience with this, it can be very difficult. So I want to acknowledge that first and foremost. And Richard, I would love, there's so much to talk about.
So please.
Why don't we talk first about Mrs. Potiphar?
Okay.
Because I think that you see her in a much more positive light than I do. And I think that that's rooted in that very first painting on top, the painting of Mrs. Potiphar having this prophetic vision. So why don't we talk about that a little bit?
Okay. I guess all right. I think, how should I put this? I have to, when I first met you, you put forward a notion that we needed to, and we kind of agreed, to redeem Eve. That obviously what Eve did was she disobeyed God. Now, she was tricked into it, but to be a bit heretical, it was a setup, right? I mean, you know, if Eve didn't do that, we wouldn't be here. That's nothing to talk about with that. So therefore, the redemption of Eve, meaning to try to understand the role of women who maybe don't always play by the book and do what's necessary, became a theme for me. Taking Mrs. Potiphar and seeing the midrash, which is, I mean, it's a real midrash, I didn't make that up, that she had a prophetic vision, then gave me a reason to re-understand her behavior. Also, I'm not alone in this. You read the paper. I mean, I wrote this paper on these two narratives in 2004, and there are lots of narratives that talk about her in a positive act. And she, even though she's called by the rabbis also like as a she-bear, she's also thought of as somehow a person who there's a justification for what she does. So, and so it's all a puzzle, right? So she started out with that she has this vision that she has something to do with this family, and maybe that she'll have a child by Joseph. And then you get the midrash that talks about Asnat being adopted by Mr. and Mrs. Potiphar. It's irresistible. That's the vision is the beginning. Asnat is at the end, and Asnat is again. I pushed it even further by putting Mrs. Potiphar in that scene of the cross blessing. But the fact of the matter is that look, Joseph had become so assimilated that his own father didn't know who his grandchildren were, because they looked like little Egyptian kids, right? And not to mention, his own brothers didn't know who he was, because he totally looked like an Egyptian. What's Asnat's role? Asnat, by the way, again, the midrash is a perikop, the Rabbi Eliezer. Asnat is sent down there with a plaque on her that says Kodesh LaHashem, or it says identifies her as a Jew. She is the one person in that narrative that knows she's Jewish. And hence I see her role as the role of reminding Joseph that he's Jewish. Now, true, I'm reaching a bit by drawing Mrs. Potiphar in, but after all, she becomes the mother-in-law. So how can I not redeem her too? So that's I rationale for going to. I admit we're pushing the envelope here, but these characters are there for a reason. And if I can reread, the famous phrase, read against the grain. Right? If I can do that with these women, then these women stop being the source of scorn on the part of men for all women, right? And especially when I haven't really shown it this way, but Mrs. Potiphar as the older woman who's lusting after the young man, right? That doesn't do older women very much good. If I can redeem her in some way and say she is a positive force in this, and that, your problem with her, of course, is because she's both so aggressive, and it's because it seems to be all about sexuality. All right, it is at the end of the day misplaced sexuality. She thought she was going to be the mother of Joseph's child, and it wasn't. It was her stepdaughter. Well, we all make mistakes.
Yeah. So as you know, much of the work that I've been doing recently has been trying to redeem Eve and trying to redeem what it means for Eve to be the standard bearer for what it means to be woman in Tanakh. And I totally agree with you that we need to work hard to see the women in our stories as positive forces, and do everything we can. But I also think that the way that we ultimately redeem women is not to make them all righteous. I think that it's possible, right, for the woman to be righteous, for her to be wonderful, for her to be a villain, and for her to be somewhere in between, which is probably where most of us are. And so I guess I'm both drawn to your desire to make her a more positive character, right? And I also want to say, well, there should also be room for us to say that some of these women in the Torah can also be, not such positive characters, and we'll let them be. We don't have to redeem all of them. Right. So that's number one. I guess the second thing is this midrash where it all starts off, where Mrs. Potiphar has a dream or a prophetic vision, and she sees that she's going to have a child with Joseph. And to me, these prophecies are what get us into trouble in Bereshit again and again. When people have some sort of vision, some sort of prophecy of the way things need to be, and therefore take extremely immoral action in order to get there, that's what I think is the root of so many problems, right? When Rebecca and Jacob think that Yaakov deserves a blessing, and so they trick Yitzchak and they trick Esav. When people make those decisions based on prophecy that must be, right? I think that that's the root of a lot of the problems that come up, and that people eventually have to learn that just because you have a vision doesn't give you license to do whatever you want with it.
you're of course right. And I mean, I've only tried to overstate my case in terms of Mrs. Potiphar because it's a steep hill.
Yeah.
And that's for sure. I mean, it's interesting that you should bring up the that stolen blessing. I mean, there's no, you know, the enmity between Yaakov and Esav is considered to be lifelong, and has twisted our narratives and our sensibilities of the other and other people. You're right, but it is rather curious that this becomes, you know, a central point. And the rabbis go out of their way to basically, you know, legitimize it. I fight against those things too. You're right, and it's yeah. I mean, it's hard to know where to stop with the redemptions.
Yes, but I guess, yeah.
There's also the nice thing about the way both I've been describing this painting and also a lot of the way that you've been interacting with all these notions is that there's frequently a great deal of creativity in the antinomian.
Mm-hmm.
When you and doesn't mean you have to necessarily be antinomian, but if you can get out to the edge and see in from an antinomian perspective, you suddenly can see differently.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the creativity about it that I feed off of and really gives me a lot of creative energy. And it's also, I guess, you know, look, I know also what I'm doing. I am a man of the 20th and the 21st century, and one having brought up, you know, I'm a child of the 60s, and so when I encounter the more sensuous approach to sexuality that you either see in Torah itself, or frequently actually the rabbis, you know, layer things down, except by the way, when they don't, of course, right? But especially when you encounter when you encounter the kinds of texts that you see out of Art Scroll and you know, or Orthodox commentary, you know, sexuality is something that we have to be extremely cynicistic about, and we must be, you know, it seems to fly in the face of not only a lot of the narratives that I see in the Torah and a lot of the midrashim that I see the rabbinic class actually exploring, but also it's the sensibility of the world that I live in, and so hence I go down these roads. Because I don't consider sexuality bad, you know, and therefore, so I'm trying to see here in the Torah narratives where sexuality is being used for a momentous purpose of, i.e., of getting us the first narrative, the narrative of Mrs. Potiphar gets us into Egypt, and getting us into Egypt gets us out of Egypt as Exodus and gets us the Torah. The narrative of Tamar gets us to David and gets us to Mashiach. These are, to me, these are momentous, streams in Torah that are fueled by, very frequently, as I'm trying to show here, female sexuality. And by the way, takes two to tango, male sexuality also, right?
Yes.
You know,
yes. And
so
I love that.
You know.
I love that, and I think that it goes back to Eve when, after the eating from the tree, Adam calls her Chava because she haita em kol chai. She is the mother of all living, and I kind of take that as she's that original life force. You know, that original life force. The way that you say that women are engines of change, right? They're life forces that come through the narrative when things are dead. Or when things are not moving, you know, like Judah is not doing anything. He's not moving on with building a future. Tamar has to come in with that life force, even if that life force has to be under wraps. And, you know, there's something about the women here who are moving things forward with their sexual creativity, with their
and courage. Imagine the courage that Tamar had to summon in that household to go and pose, and the courage to seduce her father-in-law. I mean, it's hard to almost say the words, right? I mean, but there it is. And these aren't the only narratives. I mean, I've also done a lot of work on Lot's daughters. Again, how can you celebrate incest? Well, I've done a series of paintings called The Daughters Lot, in which traces that, of course, which ends up going through Moab, and then going through Ruth, and going through David again.
Mm-hmm.
So it's as I keep, I'm not making this stuff up. I mean, you know, but frequently it's not seen. Frequently it's just there's a disconnect about like the disconnect between Lot's daughters and Ruth. And my job as an artist, and I think in a way, no, not in a way, definitely your job as a rabbi is to make the connections so that we need to think about these things. And you know,
yeah, and I wonder, I'm thinking about your art as another kind of life force, you know, that kind of brings things through, or shepherds ideas through, or new ideas through in the same kind of way. And I wonder if
I hope so. I mean, that's why I make the paintings and try, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I think Devere is going to tell us we got to open it up for questions.
Yeah, go ahead, Devere.
Yes. So thank you very much for just a fascinating exploration, and we're going to open it up. Please, if anyone has any questions in the chat, we have time to hear from the audience, and to hear also from our artist and rabbi their responses. First question, just to think about while we wait for questions, is the connection of this, like that the stories that you tell go through the messianic lineage of the Messiah of Joseph, the child lineage of Joseph, and the Messiah of the lineage of David, going all the way through. Is there something in the quality of the interactions of Miss Potiphar and the interactions of Tamar that informed the difference of like those two archetypes of Messiah?
Well, I'll tell you, Mashiach Yosef is not a theme in these paintings. That's not there. I mean, if you can find it, be my guest. And I know there is such a thing, but that is a minor mode of messianic thinking. And I know it exists, but it's definitely not something that I was pursuing here. Here, the Yosef is important because of Yosef, of he becomes the means through which we are saved from a famine. We are, yes, enslaved, but then it is the crucible in which we become a people. So that's where I see Joseph as getting us to that crucible, not as Mashiach.
So, thinking about your question a little bit more, we really hadn't thought about that. It's a very interesting question about the two messianic lines and the ways that they play out. We were more thinking about the ways that the women interact with the men here. But I would say that Yosef, his superpower, right, is that he's able to hold himself back, right? And that's really a quality of the Mashiach, the messianic line of Yosef, and why he's called it tzaddik, that he can hold himself back. And when you see on the other side with Yehuda and Tamar, and then with David, right, their strength is that they go forward, right? Yehuda says, oh, Tamar is the mother, you know, I'm the father of Tamar's child, or David is there and dancing and going out. And I think you see those two different strengths on the two sides of the painting.
That's very interesting. Yes, absolutely the case. Right. And also, by the way, in terms of restraining himself, ultimately, the greatness of Joseph is he restrains himself in terms of his brothers. Right? That's another kind of restraint, which, I mean, you know, what they did to him, would have been totally natural and understandable if you would have, thrown them all into prison and just thrown away the key.
Agreed.
The centrality of that bottom panel to the centrality that you have of Miriam, it's kind of like that's a narrative that's taken away from the two stories that you describe.
Yes.
And is there a narrative that you're like kind of showing of putting Eve in the background, going into Miriam, and then almost the background of that is the story of awakened sexuality as well?
Should I start, Richard, or would you like to?
Please.
Okay. So Dvir, there's so much to say in answer to that question. I don't even know where to start. I love this idea of the central panel being mostly women. We had played around with it a little bit. Originally, the center panel was going to have David and Moshe there. And we looked at it for a while and then said, wait a second, we're talking about the power of women. Why is the central panel? Why does it have two male figures here? And so we took that away and we went with these women. And what I love about this is that there's another midrash, right, about where did the women get their tambourines and their drums from at the sea? And the midrash is that as everybody was packing to get away from Egypt, the women took their tambourines and their drums and they said, God is surely going to save us. So let's pack these things so that we can praise God when that happens. And to me, that kind of epitomizes this life force, this knowing or this acting when nobody else is ready to act, this ability of the women to just take a step forward, even before anybody else sees that next step. They're able to take that step forward and they're vindicated because it's true, they actually do take out their drums and they are dancing. And so I kind of see this image of Adam and Chava starting that first, okay, we need to act, we need to have a life force, we need to go forward, culminating in these women singing and dancing at the sea.
The central panel was, in its way, actually the most difficult panel in the entire painting. All the other panels are based upon paintings that I've already done, or like the double stroller I've never done before, and a few others are new, but most of them are works that I've been doing, like I say, for like the last 25 years. So based upon those compositions, the center panel, it started out as like Aliza said, with Moshe and with David. Moshe was holding the luchos, and David was actually holding an electric guitar because he's he's a lute player. And then almost this apotheosis of Eve, with two angels on either side of her, and she was in the middle, and it was kind of a static image, and it didn't really say anything about Eve other than we were trying to redeem her. Well, we worked, and the image of Eve giving Adam the fig, the forbidden fruit. This is all of about 4 days old, and this was Aliza's suggestion. Why don't you have women approaching men and being active? Why don't we put into the center panel the initial action of a woman to make a change literally in the world and in human consciousness? And hence, so that's why that ended up being there. And so really the center panel it's one in which both the let's imagine the women at the sea as being the present, and let's think of Eve giving Adam the forbidden fruit as the ultimate past. It brings them both together. So that's what's going on in that central panel. And again, with the instruments, you're absolutely right. That's like, they didn't just appear. The women had to think and plan to take it. And so also, I couldn't think of a good image of that. But I already could think of a good image of how the women made sure there were a Jewish people to be redeemed. i.e., they made sure that their husbands weren't too tired to have relations with them and actually were interested enough and therefore built families. So.
And I love the way, Richard, that the trees on the bottom echo the original tree from the Garden of Eden. So beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions in the chat that seem pertinent?
A question about Tamar and whether Tamar had ever been married again. If the Midrash ever looks into that.
I have not seen any midrashim in which Tamar marries again. There is a question about whether she continues being with Yehuda or not. Some say that she definitely does, and some say that,
really?
that she never does again.
Right. Yeah, I mean, these things happen, as it were, but this is kind of the end of her story. You know, I mean, it's a truncated kind of story. We don't have any, you know, her future was to have the children, but also, by the way, obviously, having children is not enough. You have to raise the children. Mm-hmm. So, but the Midrash is less interested in that.
And another question is about the stories of Tamar coming from a place of sin, and is there anything about how the Mashiach emerges out of transgression?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's, in fact, that's the hallmark. That's the hallmark of Mashiach. The two family lines are this, right, in which a daughter-in-law has relations with her father-in-law, and not to mention the story before that, and then Lot's daughters and incest. Not to mention some raised our eyebrows exactly. What does Ruth do in the threshing room floor? So I mean, the Mashiach is founded upon transgression.
Yeah, I guess I would think about it as Mashiach is going to be something that doesn't just happen in a normal course of events, right? You don't perfect the world. In the normal course of events, we open up our newspapers and every day they look the same with different players doing different bad things, right? And Mashiach is going to be something new. And when you create something new, you need a force to create that new thing. I do think I just want to be cautious and say it's not that you know, like the Shabtai Tzvi had this whole idea of going forward through sin, right? Aveira lishma. I don't think we're saying that, but I do think that we're saying that you need to go further than you thought you might need to in order to affect change. And you also need to do a real cheshbon hanefesh, a real inner accounting, further than you might think you would need to do, right? Like Yehuda has to do a real inner accounting. Yosef has to do a real inner accounting, and they're pushed to do that. They can't just do that on their own. And all those things combine, I think, to lead us to the kind of times and place that we want to have.
I would add that more and more, the longer I learn Torah and Tanakh, these are not role models. These are not models of behavior that we want to emulate. They are instead narratives that get us to think about the enormous complexity that life is, and not to deal with life in simply dualisms, good, bad, black, white. All of this is about enormous amounts of gray, enormous amounts of questioning, and that's the point of our glorious Torah and Tanakh and the commentators. That it's that life ain't easy. It's you know, we try to make it easy, thank God, because we have a halacha, right? So, you know, I'm told to get up in the morning, do certain things, boom, boom, and I'm told not to do things. That makes life easy. But haven't you noticed that then other things happen and you don't have an answer? There's no Shulchan Aruch about what to do this and how to do that. So that's what the Tanakh is presenting, the complexity of life. But Has v'Sholem should be considered to be role models, you know, for any of these characters. But it shows you what women can do and what men can do in complex situations.
Wow. So fascinating. And this entire piece has like every panel has like so many hours of contact that you've shared in your exploration. It's just really beautiful. And to your last point about that enormous amount of gray, I think the panel that you said is just an extension of the narrative, the one with the stroller, really speaks to all of the days and the narrative between the lines of the women just taking care of their children and that role that they played in the day-to-day. Really, it's just been such an honor to hear both of you unpack this incredibly detailed piece. And this is one of our 30 fellows that are in engagement with texts. We have artists every week just doing very fascinating, interesting theological unpackings. And it's been a real honor to hear from both of you, Rabbanit, Aliza, and Richard McBee. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, really. You and the congregation, thank you. Wow.
Yes, thank you so much.
So I just wanted to thank you again on behalf of the Sisterhood and Shaar Hashomayim. Thank you guys so much. That was so fascinating, and your painting is beautiful. Thank you very much for sharing it with us. Thank you, Rabbanit. Thank you, Richard. And thank you very much to Davir and the Amena Institute. Have a great night, everybody.